Clint Eastwood and Sandra Bullock sat side by side on the brightly lit stage, the audience buzzing with excitement as the talk show began. The host, known for his sharp tongue and edgy humor, had been building up anticipation for the evening, making playful jokes at the expense of his guests. But as the conversation shifted to more personal topics, it was clear that his humor had crossed a line. "So Clint," the host began, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, "you've spent decades in Hollywood making films that everyone remembers, but tell me, do you ever feel like maybe your time is over?" The audience chuckled, sensing the teasing tone, but Clint, ever the professional, sat still, his face a mask of calm. Sandra, sitting beside him, shot the host a glance, but said nothing. Clint leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. "I've been around long enough to know that in this business it's not about when your time is up," Clint replied, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "It's about doing the work, doing what you love and not worrying about what others say." The host, clearly not satisfied with Clint's calm response, turned to Sandra with a grin. "And Sandra," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you've had your fair share of roles as well, but tell me, do you ever feel like you're just playing the same character over and over again?" The audience's laughter grew louder, but Sandra's expression remained unshaken. She leaned in slightly, her eyes locking with the host's, a quiet confidence radiating from her. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone," Sandra said, her voice soft but unwavering. "What matters to me is that I've always remained true to myself and the roles I choose. That's what keeps me going, and that's what defines me." The host, sensing that his usual sharp jabs weren't landing as expected, tried to regain control of the conversation. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Well, well," he said, his tone taking on a more mocking edge. "It sounds like we have two Hollywood legends who think they can't be touched. But come on, Clint, doesn't it ever bother you to be considered old school in a world that's constantly changing?" He raised an eyebrow, expecting Clint to bristle, but Clint, unfazed, met his gaze with a calmness that only made the host seem more desperate. "What's wrong with being old school?" Clint responded, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. "I've never been concerned with what's popular. I've always believed in doing the work, whether it's in style or not." The host's grin faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. But here's the thing, Clint," the host continued, his voice laced with mockery. "The world's moving forward and you're, well, stuck in the past, aren't you?" The audience was on edge, caught between the awkwardness of the exchange and their curiosity about how Clint would respond. But Sandra, who had been quiet until now, leaned in, her voice cutting through the tension. "You seem to be under the impression that change is always for the better," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But change isn't always progress, and not every trend is worth following." The host opened his mouth to respond, but Sandra didn't give him the chance. "Sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to stand your ground and be true to yourself," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "It's easy to mock others for staying true to their values, but what's really hard is respecting that everyone's journey is different." The host's expression shifted from smugness to uncertainty as Sandra's words hit their mark. Clint gave her a small nod of approval, and for the first time that evening, the host seemed at a loss for words. The room had gone silent, the once playful energy now replaced with a palpable tension. The host, caught off guard by Sandra's directness and Clint's unwavering composure, was at a loss for how to proceed. He had expected to throw them off balance with his sharp wit, but instead, both Clint and Sandra had turned the tables, showing not just their strength but their wisdom. The host cleared his throat, attempting to recover his previous bravado. All right, he said, chuckling awkwardly. "I guess I can't argue with that. You've both certainly got your points." The audience, sensing the shift, erupted into applause, not just for Clint and Sandra's responses, but for the quiet power they had exuded in the face of mockery. The host quickly moved on to the next segment, clearly trying to salvage the rest of the interview, but it was clear that the tone had changed. Sandra and Clint, however, had made their mark. Sandra turned to Clint, a small, appreciative smile on her face. "I think we've got this one in the bag," she said softly, her voice still carrying that calm confidence. Clint nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's not about winning, Sandra," he said, his voice low. It's about staying true to yourself and knowing when to speak up. That's what matters. Sandra chuckled softly. Well, I think we've spoken up plenty. Clint's smile grew slightly, but he didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered loud and clear, both on the stage and to the audience watching at home. The rest of the show went on without incident, but the energy had shifted. The host, no longer able to lean on his usual tactics, ended the interview with a more respectful tone, thanking Clint and Sandra for being part of the show. As they walked off the stage, Clint gave Sandra a look of quiet approval, and she returned it with a grin. "Thanks for having my back," she said, her tone light but sincere. "I think we made a good team." Clint just nodded, his expression unchanged but his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a battle well fought, without ever needing to raise his voice. As Clint and Sandra made their way off the set, the atmosphere was completely different from when they first entered. The tension had evaporated, replaced by a sense of mutual respect that hung in the air. It wasn't just the audience that had shifted. The host had also seemed to understand something important in that moment. Mocking people, especially those who have spent their lives earning respect, only revealed the weakness in the mocker, not the mocked. They walked backstage together, their conversation light, the easy camaraderie between them evident. Sandra, her usual grace returning, turned to Clint with a playful smirk. "I have to say, I was impressed by your timing tonight," she said. "You really know how to put someone in their place without raising your voice." Clint smiled softly, his expression both humble and knowing. "Sometimes, you don't have to shout to make a point," he said quietly. "It's all about staying calm, focused, and knowing when to stand firm." Sandra nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I think tonight was a good reminder for both of us," she said, "that we don't need to play into someone else's idea of who we should be. We already have the strength and the confidence inside of us." Clint looked at her with a rare, approving smile. "Exactly," he said. "Sometimes people think they can tear you down to make themselves feel bigger, but the real strength comes from being able to stay true to who you are, regardless of what anyone else says." As they reached the exit, Sandra paused, glancing at Clint. "I've learned something important tonight," she said, her voice steady. "Not just about handling people like that host, but about how to truly stand up for yourself and your beliefs without losing your dignity." Clint gave her a small nod, his expression softening. "That's the key," he said. "It's not about fighting back with anger or insults. It's about standing tall with integrity and letting your actions speak for themselves." Sandra smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the reminder. "Thanks, Clint," she said quietly, "for always showing me how it's done." Clint chuckled, lightly, the warmth in his eyes unmistakable. "You don't need anyone to show you, Sandra," he said. "You've always known how to stand strong. You just have to remember it." As Clint and Sandra stepped into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling around them, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They had both been through so much in their careers, faced countless challenges and criticism, but tonight had been different. It hadn't been about fighting for attention or recognition. It had been about standing firm in their beliefs and showing that respect for oneself and others was the real mark of strength. Sandra felt lighter than she had in days. The earlier tension, the unease she had felt from the mocking comments, now felt like a distant memory. It was as if Clint had not only defended her, but reminded her of the power she already possessed. Power that didn't come from the approval of others, but from staying true to who she was. "You know," Sandra said, breaking the comfortable silence between them as they walked to their cars, "I think the hardest part about moments like that is not letting it shake you. People want to tear you down for being who you are, but the moment you start doubting yourself, they win." Clint nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's right. The moment you give someone else power over your self-worth, you've already lost. It's not their opinion that matters, it's yours." Sandra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the gratitude she felt. "Thanks, Clint. I think tonight I learned a little more about where my strength really lies." Clint smiled at her, the faintest twinkle in his eye. It's always been there. Sometimes it just takes a little reminder. They paused by their cars, the hum of the city surrounding them. Sandra, feeling the weight of the night lift, smiled at Clint. "I think I'll carry that reminder with me," she said. "From now on, I won't let anyone else define me. Not the host, not anyone." Clint's eyes softened, the quiet wisdom that came with age evident in his gaze. "You don't need anyone else to define you," he said gently. "You're already defined, by your actions, your heart, and how you carry yourself. Don't let anyone take that from you." As they said their goodbyes and went their separate ways, Sandra felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. The lesson Clint had taught her tonight wasn't just about handling rude comments. It was about reclaiming her own power and never letting anyone else's words dictate her worth. Please subscribe channel for Clint Eastwood respect thanks.